$253 billion a year. That is not a typo, and it is not an exaggeration. That is how much Americans paid in credit card interest and fees in a single year. For a long time, the number people talked about was $130 billion a year. But that figure is outdated. Based on the most current data available in 2026, the real number is $253 billion. To be exact, Americans paid $255.37 billion in credit card interest and fees in 2025 alone. That is more than triple what they paid just 4 years earlier. Here is the part that should genuinely bother you. None of that money came from a single dramatic mistake. It came from small, quiet, completely legal design choices. The minimum payment button, the grace period fine print, the order in which fees get charged. Each one was engineered, tested, and refined by an industry that knows exactly what it is doing. Today, I am breaking down exactly how credit card companies built a $253 billion a year revenue machine out of your spending habits. We will walk through the 5 specific mechanisms doing the heavy lifting. By the end, you will see the whole system clearly and you will know how to stay out of it. Let's get into it. Let's start with just how big this industry has become, because the scale genuinely is staggering. As of the first quarter of 2026, Americans owe $1.252 trillion on credit cards. That is the highest balance since the Federal Reserve began tracking this data in 1999. It is up 63% since the pandemic low in early 2021, and it sits $325 billion above the pre-pandemic record. So who is carrying all of this debt? 78% of U.S. adults now hold at least one credit card. That is spread across roughly 648 million total accounts in the United States alone. The average household carrying a balance owes $11,507, and they are paying an average interest rate of 21%. New card offers average even higher, closer to 23.79%. Now put those two numbers together, $1 trillion balance and a 21% average rate. Once you line those up, you start to see exactly where $253 billion a year comes from. This is not a handful of people making one bad decision. This is 111 million Americans, roughly half of everyone who carries a card. They are paying interest and fees month after month, on a system that was quietly built to keep that number growing. Now let's look at the first mechanism. The single most profitable design choice in the entire credit card industry is the minimum payment. Here is what it is actually engineered to do. The minimum payment is calculated to be just large enough that you feel like you are handling your debt responsibly, and just small enough that the vast majority of your balance keeps accruing interest, month after month. On a typical card, paying only the minimum on a few $1,000 balance can take years to pay off, and the total interest paid over that time can exceed the original amount you borrowed. Think about that for a moment. You could end up paying more in interest than the thing you bought actually cost. This is not an accident of math. It is the entire business model. A cardholder who pays their statement in full every month is often called a transactor. A transactor generates almost no interest revenue for the issuer. A cardholder who pays only the minimum is called a revolver. The revolver is the customer the entire interest rate structure is built around. And right now, roughly half of all cardholders are revolvers. They carry a balance month to month instead of paying in full. That single button, the minimum payment, is doing an enormous amount of the work. Now let's move to a mechanism almost nobody talks about. This one is one of the clearest examples of quiet, deliberate profit engineering in the entire industry. It is called the APR margin. The APR margin is the gap between the interest rate you are charged and the actual cost of funds to the bank. Over the last decade, that average margin has widened by 4.3 percentage points. That widening alone, separate from any change in risk or default rates, generated an estimated $25 billion in additional interest revenue for major card issuers in a single year. For the average cardholder carrying a balance, that excess margin cost over $250 in 1 year. That is money that had nothing to do with covering actual lending risk. Here is what makes this particularly telling. This happened during a period when charge-off rates stayed relatively stable. A charge-off is when an issuer writes off unpaid debt. At the same time, the share of subprime borrowers did not meaningfully increase. In other words, the risk did not go up. The margin did. Even cardholders with the highest credit scores have been paying more. not because they became riskier borrowers, but because the entire pricing structure simply shifted upward across every credit tier. So the risk stayed flat and the profit margin climbed anyway. Now let's talk about the third mechanism, the fee stack. Interest is the biggest line item, but it is far from the only one. Card issuers have built an entire stack of fees that layer on top of interest. Each one is small enough to avoid real pushback, but collectively, they are worth billions. Annual fees now average $28.25. That is up nearly 19% in a single year. Balance transfer fees average just under 3% of the transferred amount, also up notably year over year. Foreign transaction fees sit around 1.58%, and cash advance fees have climbed to just over 4%. A cash advance is one of the most expensive ways to access your own credit line. On top of that fee, interest typically starts accruing immediately, with no grace period at all. Late fees deserve a special mention, because this is one of the few areas where 2026 actually brought real consumer protection. A regulatory cap now limits late fees to $8 per incident. That is down from an average of roughly $37. That is a genuine, meaningful win for consumers. But it is also exactly why issuers have leaned harder into every other fee category and into interest margin to offset the revenue that cap removed. Here is the pattern to remember. When one channel gets capped, the industry does not shrink its revenue target. It simply redistributes it. Now let's get to the fourth mechanism, and this one may surprise you. This is the mechanism that flips the entire get free money back pitch on its head. Rewards cards feel like a gift. Cash back, points, miles. But that money has to come from somewhere, and it is not coming from the card company's goodwill. It is funded by interchange fees charged to merchants on every transaction. And even more significantly, it is funded by the interest paid by revolving cardholders. Multiple studies on credit card economics have found that rewards programs function as a wealth transfer. Cardholders who pay in full and rack up points are effectively subsidized by cardholders carrying a balance. Because the interest paid by the second group funds the rewards enjoyed by the first. Let that sink in. The person struggling with a balance is quietly paying for the points of the person who never carries one. This is why the most heavily marketed cards tend to combine two things: an attractive reward structure and a high standard APR. The rewards are the hook. The APR is where the actual revenue model lives, and it only works profitably for the issuer if a meaningful share of cardholders do not pay in full every month. Now we come to the fifth and final mechanism. This one is not a fee or a rate. It is inertia, and it is arguably the most powerful revenue driver of all five. Every part of the card experience is designed to reduce friction and increase usage. Tap to pay, saved card details, autopay, set to the minimum by default rather than the full balance. One-click online checkout. Every one of these features is genuinely convenient, but every one of them also increases the likelihood that a balance quietly grows month over month, and it happens without a single deliberate decision being made. The system is not designed around a single bad choice. It is designed around the absence of an active one. That is the genius of it and the danger of it. So where does this leave you? None of this means credit cards are inherently bad. Used well, they are a legitimate financial tool. But used well has a specific narrow definition. It means paying the statement balance in full, every single month without exception. If you are currently carrying a balance, that is the single most important thing to focus on. Attack the highest interest balance first, and stop treating the minimum payment as a real payment. Turn off autopay set to the minimum and set it to the full statement balance instead. Read the fee schedule on your card, especially for cash advances and balance transfers, and be honest with yourself about whether the rewards are actually worth the interest you may be paying to earn them. Because now you can see the machine for what it is. $253 billion a year does not come from mistakes. It comes from design. And once you understand the design, you can finally step outside of it.